Hi, this is John Reed. Continuing with my informal reading of Reaching the Informed B2B Buyer, a Diginomica book that I wrote, we have Chapter 1, Just How Informed is Today's B2B Buyer. This is one of my favorite chapters in the book, and when I read it, I think you'll see why. So just how informed is today's B2B buyer? It's a good question, but first we must ask, why is reaching B2B buyers so different now? And there are two answers to that. One, the shift to subscription software. This puts the focus on long-term customer results. Renewals are also a chance to opt out. That puts pressure on software vendors to continually earn their value well past go-live. Land and expand might be perceived by vendors as an ideal way to grow, but that won't work if your buyers are underwhelmed. Two, the emergence of the customer experience market. A funny thing happened to SaaS vendors. As they emphasized CX software, customers decided to judge them by that same standard of so-called customer success across sales, service, and support. Oh, and by the way, I call that the buzzword boomerang effect. And then we have a tweet from Maureen Blanford, Marine B2B, on Twitter at the time, also on Blue Sky now. Hi TechCo's buyer here. Guess what's more important to me than price? 1, integration, duh. 2, your humans after the sale. If you can prove to me that your success team is better than your competitors, that will win me over versus any other buying criteria. So back to our headline question, just how informed is today's B2B buyer? Certainly it's a fair question. No buyer has perfect information. Even the most nimble organizations can struggle with entropy. Enterprise buying remains complex. Software vendors still have deep marketing budgets and well-oiled sales operations. However, aggressive sales tactics such as competitor bashing, aka FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, make it more difficult for buyers to judge the veracity of vendors' claims. Internally, buyers also have their hands full in their day-to-day roles. Big software purchases bring stakeholders with competing priorities into the mix. Some buying experts believe these challenges encourage inertia or decision paralysis. Combine that with the deluge of marketing content that buyers must contend with, see AI for the latest example of that, and the question of how informed today's buyer really is makes sense to pose before we go any further. What we do know is that today's buyer is more independent in their research. According to Gartner, when B2B buyers are considering a purchase, they spend much more time learning independently online than anywhere else, and I've quoted some of those stats already. Only 17% of buying time involves supplier meetings. In instances where buyers are comparing multiple suppliers, the amount of time spent with any one sales rep may be only 5 to 6% of the total buying time. In research from Demand Gen Report, 1/3 of buyers said the length of their purchase cycle has increased significantly compared with 1 year ago, and we continue to see that with complex macroeconomic conditions. So what's causing that increase? 45% spend more time researching purchases. 45% use more sources to research and evaluate purchases. And 44% have more formal buying groups or committees to review purchases. Statistics on the growing independence of the enterprise buyer are plentiful. Here are just two. 57% of the purchase decision is complete before a customer even calls the supplier. That's via corporate executive board. And 67% of the buyer's journey is now done digitally. Serious decisions. These are the types of figures that lead to phrases like the informed buyer, but it's not that simple. Hank Barnes, VP and Distinguished Analyst at Gartner, has challenged this concept with me, and we've had some spirited debates and discussions around it. He's written extensively on the problem of buying complexity, which you should check out on his blog. A big takeaway from his buying research, he worries that today's supposedly informed buyer is really struggling to digest an onslaught of data. B2B buying is usually committee-based, which means there could be up to 10 people or even more involved in the purchase decision. A consensus-driven approach is also a challenge to manage. Not only do buyers have to deal with an overwhelming amount of information as they do their research, but it is also gathered by different members of the buying committee who may be at odds with each other. In an interview with Diginomica, Barnes spoke about the low number of high-quality deals being reported. So how does Gartner define a high-quality deal? It's when the customer believes the purchase is meeting expectations. So I asked Hank Barnes for more about that. In one study, Barnes found that only 27% of the 1,464 enterprise buying decision makers surveyed met the criteria for a high-quality deal. In 2022, that number fell to 20%. Ouch. The most concerning post from Barnes Gartner data was this. In new research, many enterprise buyers resigned to failure, which is a heck of a headline. He raised the problem of buyer complacency. He found that even when the buying decision is highly rated, When the purchase is meeting expectations, the project might flatline anyway. As Barnes told me in a subsequent podcast, in this study, we dove in pretty hard into the idea of the biggest project people were on and what things they were facing. We saw that 46% of them fit into the group of, this is the biggest thing they were involved in and it was still failing to meet expectations. But we also asked them, what was your feeling about the overall buying experience? And what was your satisfaction with the experience during the buying process with the lead vendor? And the percentages were like 90 to 92%, but they're falling. Then Barnes added bluntly, it's indicative of a culture of complacency. But it's not just complacency. It's also the complexity of judging teams and agendas. A significant portion of them say that within their own team it was difficult, Barnes said. There were conflicting objectives and there were a lot of disagreements and not necessarily productive ones. There was a big struggle to reach consensus. We're not going to solve all the complexities of enterprise buying in this ebook. But what we can conclude from the above conflicting data points is that the imperfect buyer is in an imperfect continuum of sorts. Yes, B2B buyers strive to be more educated about their options, but they contend with pressures which make that ambition difficult. So you're not going to find a completely informed B2B buyer. The term is aspirational and it's a moving target. But I would also like to add that those diverse committees and teams that influence buying decisions are a good example of why it's so important to be reaching multiple stakeholders involved in the buying decision with different forms of content, etc. At Diginomica, we've learned that buyers count on advisors and experts for context. They want content which makes their decisions easier and their projects better. And yes, they judge vendors on their ability to help. But while vendors might want to show off their latest low-code tools, buyers also need help with the nitty-gritty of integration and the ease of support. So they'll listen to that low-code pitch, but only if you grasp their industry and current situation. Start from this premise, therefore. B2B buyers have much better BS detectors than they had in the past. That's thanks to the continual access to online research and peer reviews, from Glassdoor and LinkedIn Banter to TrustRadius and G2. They need content to help them navigate their internal complexity and experts to guide them. Plus, they need trusted advisors to ensure that their purchase helps them survive difficult markets and emerge stronger. In other words, what buyers need doesn't sound like classic sales and marketing anymore. B2B buying is not an impulse decision, even less so in today's market, where economic uncertainty and consumer sentiment just add more and more purchasing hurdles. Yes, there is a growing market for low-end, frictionless B2B software purchases on credit cards, but the higher end of B2B software decisions requires extensive software evaluation. That puts pressure on vendor sales teams to live up to their glowing literature. So from this point on, we'll use the term informed buyer, but with the caveat that being informed is an imperfect pursuit. Let's treat it as more of a wake-up call than a simple description. Buyers now need something more, something different from those who serve them. And a critical part of this is better content. So when it comes to reaching buyers with content, where does that leave us? Buyers are often deluged with conflicting, hard-to-sort information from different vendors. They're spending more and more time networking and researching on their own, and they want more accurate and helpful information. So those who provide expert, relevant industry information will earn a buyer's trust. However, developing content for each pre-calculated stage of the buyer's journey is at best an approximate baseline. So here's a better and more ambitious goal. Buyers must supply the right information in the format the buyer needs whenever the buyer needs it. But what is the right type of information? Before we answer that, we must rethink two problematic concepts, the sales funnel and the buyer's journey. So here we go. Chapter 2. The sales funnel needs a rethink, but so does the buyer's journey. Wouldn't it be convenient if buyers neatly progressed from one buying phase to the next? Well, that's not coming back. Buyers may be going through multiple phases simultaneously. New product announcements, acquisitions, and restructurings can change their priorities overnight. That fluidity can suck marketing campaigns, targeted emails, and sales calls into a black hole. So how do you deal with nonlinear buying? Create relevant content for the key issues. Assume that buyers are researching without involving you. Make that content easily findable no matter where the buyer's head is at. If it lives behind a sign-up wall, is that the right decision that needs thinking through, as they may not find it there? Ensure the buyer can easily find you when they surface with questions, and no, a dumb chatbot pestering website visitors is not enough. Make your community accessible to prospects and influencers so the conversations spill over from social channels in an organic and natural way. Many of those communities still operate behind customer license walls, so that's the thing to look at. Behind the engagement buzzword, old buying models lead to stale content. You'll still see folks like HubSpot and Pardot using shorthand about awareness, consideration, decision. But most of those firms are geeked out about a fancy new term, buyer engagement. For more on how these firms target the modern buyer, there's a visualization you can search for online called 14 Visualizations Mapping the B2B Buyer Journey. Forrester talks about awareness, engagement, purchase, while another Forrester slide we've seen prefers ask, engage, discover, explore, buy, use. Gartner questions old models too and now tends to push a more customer-focused view, explore, evaluate, engage, experience. That's a whole lot of engagement, so why the emphasis? The answer is the industry's previous models were too simplistic and invasive. When you attempt to generate content around those old models, it comes off as generic and impersonal. Engagement implies continual interaction. In turn, that ties your content back to buyer needs. When you consider the Forrester model from ask to use, that's an improvement. But Forrester's rethink doesn't go far enough. The funnel, as in sales funnel, has been downgraded, perhaps because it comes off as arrogant and controlling. The sales funnel fails to acknowledge that today's informed buyer is usually in control, moving at their own unpredictable pace. However, there is still value in considering the sales cycle for the purposes of content mapping, and I've written an article on that in Diginomica Archives you can search with those keywords. There is a huge difference between, on the one hand, buyers asking questions about hyperscalers and cloud strategy, and on the other, questions about your new product release. A smart content strategy anticipates both, but without ruining the moment with a pseudo-personalized sales ambush. The sales cycle also provokes a much-needed conversation about 3 types of content consumption. 1, free and fully searchable. This is also the best content to share on social media. Sharing sign-up necessary content on social gets annoying for your followers and fast. 2, what I call free premium content. This requires a sign-up. The content is generally not freely searchable. It's usually behind a sign-up wall or landing page, e.g. webinars and virtual events, or in PDF form. Sign-up is intended to advance the relationship with the reader/buyer. But it's a delicate issue as you don't want to introduce too much content consumption friction via tedious sign-up forms. This can also be considered lead gen content, though there is a risk of alienating important opt-in context with salesy follow-up spam if you do that. 3, paid content. B2B firms outside the media industry, and also with the exception of analyst firms, generally don't charge for content. But the option remains, including subscription-based payments. At its best, engagement means that readers, especially buyers, are meaningfully interacting with you and your content and ideally sharing that content with their networks. But they'll only do that if you've earned their perception of value and credibility. We have to be careful about engagement, though. It really sounds like lovely stuff, but it isn't easy to nail down. Every time the term is used well, it's abused plenty more. Buyers do want to interact with you in new ways, but on their own terms. Yes, sometimes you can force the issue, but you better be personal and relevant when you do. Assuming that buyers only want to hear from salespeople during one window of opportunity is a mistake. By now, you can see that stats like 67% of the buyer's journey is done digitally, which we shared earlier are too simplistic. Serious Decisions questions the conclusion that sales shouldn't get involved until we're halfway through the buying cycle. They challenge marketers to work with sales differently. They say, it is true that the standard is now higher for sales to add value to the conversation because so much information can be found online. Marketers, your mission is to help sellers get engaged early with customers and prospects by supporting them with enablement in the form of messages, content, and other tools. Subscription software means the deal is never done, and neither is the content. Trust must be re-earned continually. Subscription software has rendered go-live a formality and put the spotlight on post-sales retention, as I noted. We're starting to see more content maps with models like Tony Zambito's, and I'll summarize a little bit of it here. He charts out initiative, research, assess, decision, implement, support, renewal in his buying experience, the 7 phases of the buyer's journey. It's easy to see how this model necessitates a different mindset for marketing and sales and content that is required to support these phases, but something is still lacking. Models like these miss 2 vital points. I've hit on this one before, but buyers aren't always buying. What are they doing? They're always learning. Today's informed buyers get better at their jobs by building networks of expertise inside and outside company walls. So earned buyer relevance or risk being excluded from future purchases and renewals. That doesn't fit into a phase like awareness. Network building is continuous. And second, we shouldn't only be targeting buyers. We should be reaching those who influence B2B buyers as well. That means identifying the players in a consensus buying decision. That means reaching the IT experts a buyer will call upon to confirm a product's security features or compatibility with the chosen platform of a hyperscaler. This means building content around those audiences and a wider range of personas. Some of these audience members will never fit into a buyer's journey. An analyst or advisor who customers rely on to help shortlist vendors is one example. And if they are part of the buyer's theoretical trust network, then they matter. These last 2 points pose a formidable challenge to the usual buyer's journey methodology. They also pose a challenge to those content experience advocates who argue that there is no real difference between B2C and B2B. B2C marketers might be able to get away with a focus on moving prospects from personalized experiences to sales actions without worrying about those that alienate with aggressive chatbots and special offer email blasts. Certain hotel chains come to mind. Even the latest marketing tech is missing the point here. Content experience platforms, CEPs, are now in fashion, but they typically direct all content towards a buyer customer without consideration of the network around the buyer. That misses the mark in B2B. When B2B marketers focus on pushing a buyer along with content, they lose track of the complexities of B2B purchasing decisions. But this doesn't mean you can't learn from the UX chops of B2C content giants like Netflix or Spotify. For example, you can certainly learn from their AI-based content recommendation engines. B2B buyers want to consume content easily too, but at their pace, not yours. So, does the entire buyer's journey concept need to be thrown out? No. When prospects want to sample your Kool-Aid, you should have plenty of info in a responsive style. Vendor trust gets exposed by its weakest link or its most unpleasant point of contact. To serve the modern B2B buyer, you should be thinking about buyers' communities or buyers' networks. That raises fresh questions. How do you reach buyers in their networks? The core of that network is not going to be on your website, no matter how much our marketing team adores your landing pages. How do you credibly become part of these networks? How can you earn your way in with your ideas and expertise? Those "hey, we're in the magic quadrant" announcements just aren't cutting it. How do you create content that is relevant in these networks, given that buyers' BS detectors are on high alert and branded content is often unwelcome? How do you figure out the attribution issues that allow you to track content engagement into the lead gen process? And how do you determine the right ways to reach out to experts and influencers while avoiding the wrong ones? So, looking ahead, how do you reconcile what we're advocating with all the hype around personalized content experiences, potentially with the help of intelligent tools, including AI? Well, we're going to get there in the upcoming sections. So I hope you enjoyed this content, and as we get further into the book, we'll get to all of that.